Okay, we're gonna do some breakfast burritos. Breakfast burritos are a really common breakfast treat, and depending how they're made, they can be really healthy or not healthy at all. So I'm gonna kind of show you a really tasty and healthier version of it. And so I like to start with putting some potato in it. There's not really a formal recipe for them, but I do like to add potato. It gives it kind of some of that traditional taste. For potatoes, there's lots of options. And so I'm gonna show you several different ones. Any of them can be used, and you can kind of see what you like best. So first I'm gonna show you some more traditional potatoes. I like to do colors because it just makes it kind of fun. So this is just kind of a traditional white potato, a purple one, and then a pink one. When I cut into these, you'll see how beautiful they can be. So you could either do one variety or you could do a mix of them. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut these up. And I'm gonna roast them. And so a lot of times what I do is I roast a lot of things ahead. And so I roast the potatoes, say the night before, or even at the beginning of the week. And then for breakfast, all I have to do is pull it out and add it into the rest of it. Because the rest of the burrito, other than roasting the potatoes, is pretty quick. The other option for all of this is that you could make a bunch of these on the weekend or on a day that you have time, and then actually freeze them. And then breakfast, really in a hurry, you can just pull it out, heat it up, and there you go, it's ready to go. So I'm gonna show you how to roast the potatoes. So I'm just gonna cut them. The big thing is you just wanna cut the pieces into uniform sizes. So I'm gonna go ahead and chop here, get them about the same size. You do want a good knife, and if kids are helping do this, you wanna make sure either you're really comfortable using a knife or that you have a parent who's watching you. So you just wanna cut it into uniform size. So that was my white one. I'm gonna do the purple one. Now a good kind of cutting technique, which I did right one of the times and wrong one of the times, maybe you can remember, is to flip it onto a flat surface. So if you're trying to do it like this, it can be a little wobbly. It can be easier to cut yourself. So put it onto a flat side. I'm gonna chop it down the middle. Again, really watching my fingers. And again, chop it into kind of uniform size cubes. You can see in the purple one, it's got kind of lots of colors in there. The great thing about the colored potatoes is the color actually indicates it's got some vitamins. So the colored potatoes tend to have some more nutrition in them because they have some different vitamins in that color. And then this pink potato has a really cool color. When you cut into it, it turns out kind of like a pink purple color. So that can be really kind of fun. This one was a little bit bigger, so I'm actually gonna do it in thirds. So again, I'm gonna put it on its flat surface, cut this one in slightly smaller pieces so that they end up being about uniform. So I'm gonna go ahead and do all these. And a lot of times when I'm roasting things, actually I'm gonna roast a lot of different things at the same time. If you're gonna turn your oven on to a higher temperature, which is good for roasting, usually I like to roast around 425, but depending on your oven, it might need to be more or less. A lot of times I'll roast other things as well. So I might roast some cauliflower, some broccoli, some other types of squashes, and just do it all on one big sheet pan. So I tend to roast a bunch at the beginning of the week, and then you've got roasted vegetables, which can be great to add to breakfast burritos, can be great to add to salads, to rice bowls, to a variety of things. So it can be a great way to have nice vegetables. Now I'm also gonna do a sweet potato. This potato is a little bit harder to cut into, so if you're using a knife, you gotta be real careful. So sweet potato has the orange color, also offers some great vitamins in it. Has a lot of fiber. So the sweet potato has actually more fiber than most regular potatoes. It also, of course, is sweet, which adds a different flavor. So my kids like to have the sweet potato in the breakfast burritos, but you certainly can do either way, the sweet potato or the other types of potatoes. You also could use a more traditional russet potato, which is kind of that brown potato. That one tends to be a little bit drier, so I don't think it roasts quite as well, but you certainly still could do it. Same thing. You want to get about the same size pieces for all your chunks so that when you're roasting them, they end up being about uniform. So I cut those all up. I've got a pan here. I'm going to use some cooking spray. You could also use some parchment paper, and then you don't need to put the cooking spray. And I'm going to just put them on my pan here. I'm going to separate my sweet potato from my other potatoes. And then what I like to do is toss it in a little bit of oil. You could do that in a bowl, but you also can just do it on the tray. And so I'm gonna put a little bit of olive oil. I like to have a spout on my olive oil. This one does not come out that fast, so I can really control it. So I'm just gonna put a little bit of olive oil there, a little bit there. I'm gonna put a little bit of salt and pepper on them. So this is my Himalayan pink salt, which adds a little bit more flavor. You can use less of it when you use kind of the salt that comes when you're gonna grind it yourself, as opposed to table salt that's already been ready. So I'm just gonna sprinkle that on, probably about 1/8 of a teaspoon, maybe 1/4 of a teaspoon. I'm also gonna do some pepper. Just gonna grind that up a little bit. Again, you could use pre-ground pepper, it wouldn't matter. This is just a little bit more flavorful. And I'm just gonna put that on my regular potatoes. I'm not gonna put that on my sweet potato because I don't care as much for the pepper on my sweet potato, but you can certainly do it. And then I'm just gonna take my hands and kind of toss that together to kind of get the salt and pepper and olive oil spread around. And then you just wanna kind of make sure you have a big enough pan that the most of them are not touching each other. That's gonna allow it to roast really well and get really browned so that your potato comes out kind of nice and crunchy or browned. So again, you just wanna kind of spread it out so most of them are not touching. And then you do wanna put it into a preheated oven so that when it gets in, it's gonna start cooking right away. Like I said, pretty high temperature, about 425. It's gonna cook for about 20 to 25 minutes. I would check it about halfway through, kind of stir it around to make sure it's uniform and not burning too much. And then usually, again, check it at 20 minutes and see if it's ready or not. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and put that in the oven. Okay, so while those potatoes are roasting, I'm gonna work on the next part of it. So I'm gonna go ahead and do some kale. So you could pretty much use any green in this, but I like to do kale just because it's a nice hearty green. You could also do some spinach, you could also do some chard or any kind of other green that you like. But I recommend trying to get your vegetables in starting at breakfast because we're trying to aim for at least 8 to 9 servings of vegetables a day between fruit and vegetables. And it's hard to get that many in if you don't start with breakfast. So I recommend trying to get some type of fruit and or vegetable into breakfast. Greens are a great one to add to your daily routine because they offer so much nutrition. There's really good calcium, there's really good iron, as well as lots of good fiber. So I'm gonna go ahead and add some kale. So I'm gonna go ahead and chop it up. I'm just gonna chop off the bottom part. You don't always wanna eat that part. A lot of times it's a little bit old. And I'm just gonna chop it uniformly. Now you can chop your kale in big pieces. You could chop it really finely. My young children like kale sometimes, but they tend to like it more if it's in really fine cut pieces. Or sometimes I'll do big cut pieces and I'll make kale chips out of it and get them real crispy. I'll often do that in the oven and that can make it taste really yummy. So put a little bit of salt and a little bit of oil. But for this, because I'm gonna be sauteing it, I'm gonna try to do it fairly small pieces. Totally, you can do it however you prefer. I'm gonna go back and make these small as well. And then I'm just gonna pan saute this. And so in my pan, I just put a little bit of, I preheated it, and I put a little bit of olive oil spray or avocado oil spray. And so I like to make my own. And so I use a mister here, and that allows me to I'll control what I put in it. So this is avocado oil, which I like because it can withstand really high heat. So I'm just gonna spray a little bit in there. I really like cast iron pan, especially for this type of thing, because it can get really hot and brown very easily. So this is a preheated pan. I just sprayed a little bit of avocado oil. I'm gonna put in my green. Now that sizzle, when you add it, is a really good sign. It means the pan is heated and it's gonna start browning it right away. If you add whatever you are sauteing before it's truly hot, it doesn't sizzle right away. It sometimes will kind of steam it more than actually kind of get the darker color. So I'm gonna put that on there. Maybe stir it around a little bit. Again, you can hear that sizzle, which is a really good sign that you're gonna get a nice cook on it. So I'm gonna let it cook for a minute and then kind of stir it around a little bit as we go. Now some people like their greens really crunchy, and if so, you might just very lightly cook it. If you like them really well cooked, you can obviously cook them more. Now if I was to use a spinach wilts pretty quickly. It's not gonna necessarily get any crisp, and so you won't need to cook it very long. It can cook pretty quickly. So I'm gonna stir it around just a little bit there, try to make sure you can already see some of that stuff that's already cooked. I'm even getting a little bit of brown edge there because I put it into the hot pan, which I like. It gets a little bit crispy. And I'm just gonna stir this around. This is gonna cook really quick. Usually it takes no more than a couple minutes here. So you can go ahead and cook this while, like I said, those potatoes are roasting. Or if you roast the potatoes the night before, again, one less thing to have to do in the morning, and you can just put this together quickly as well. You also could cook up a bunch of the greens the night before or at the beginning of the week, and again, pull them out for different things. You potentially could use raw greens as well, but I tend to like them a little bit cooked for the purpose of breakfast burritos. So stir that around a little bit more. Again, some people might like it just like this. This might be cooked enough for you. Others might like to have it a little bit more cooked. You could sprinkle a little bit of salt onto the greens, which might add a little bit more flavor. You certainly don't have to. I find that sodium, a lot of people ask, oh, well, salt has a lot of sodium, and it does. But most people's diets, the problem with sodium is that it comes from processed foods. And so to preserve foods, they often have to add sodium, whether it's salt or just sodium, both for canned foods as well as for frozen foods. And so a lot of people's diet, the highest sodium foods are actually processed foods and not actually the salt that you're adding. If you use the salt that you're grinding, you can even use less because it has more of a salt flavor. So I'm gonna just put a tiny bit in here to season it. You could also add a little bit of pepper if you like. I did add a little bit of salt and pepper to the potatoes, so you may want to be careful not to overdo it so it's not too much flavor. So I would say that's just about done. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn this off. And next I'm gonna do my eggs. So I'm big into trying to do as little pots and pans as necessary because I hate doing the dishes. And so I am going to try to save a pan. So I'm gonna take this out and then use the same pan to do my eggs. So I'll go ahead and just take this out here, put it aside. Like I said, you could cook this ahead or you can cook it fresh. This only takes a couple minutes. So I'll go ahead and take this out of the plate. Okay, so now I'm gonna go ahead and do my eggs. And I am doing the recipe as if I was making 4 breakfast burritos. So I'm gonna do 4 eggs, but I'm just gonna scramble them all together just to make it a little bit easier. The great thing is you could obviously make one breakfast burrito in this recipe, or you could make 4, or you could make 8. For kids, that's great math. How many of the different ingredients do you need if you're doubling it, tripling it? So I'm just gonna go ahead and do the 4 eggs. I'm just gonna crack my eggs. This can be great practice for kids to learn how to crack an egg. I think the big thing is that nobody's perfect. It's common to get shells in it, and so there's different ways to fish them out when you get the shell in. We'll see if I'm gonna get by today with no shells. I'm just gonna do my 4 eggs. Ooh, I did it. Okay, so I'm gonna stir those in. I tend to like to use a fork when I'm stirring the eggs just to kind of really get them all in there. Now some people like to add milk to their scrambled eggs. It can make it a little bit fluffier. For this, I'm just gonna do the straight egg. And because we're gonna be adding so many other things in the burrito, I don't think you need to add any salt or pepper into the eggs, but you certainly could if you like to have a little bit more of that flavor. Just gonna mix those eggs up well. I have a pan here. It's the same pan I used for the kale, but I wanted a much lower heat because eggs are gonna cook quickly. So I just have it on low heat. It was preheated from my kale. I'm just gonna add a little spray of that avocado oil just to kind of coat the pan a little bit. Spread that around. And then I think that should be nice for the eggs. Okay, so this can be really fun for kids to scramble eggs. Great life skill. And if you have it on a low enough setting, you can kind of let it cook a little bit, and then we're gonna kind of push it around. So I'm gonna let it get a little bit cooked, and then you can kind of check it by pushing it around. Oh yeah, so it's getting a nice edge there. And so there's different ways to cook eggs. Some people like to move it around constantly. Some people like to let it cook and not move it as much. You can try it out and see how you like it best. And let me know if you have a preference for different ways of cooking them, or if you have other tricks for cooking eggs. Now, if you like eggs different than scrambled, you certainly could do them other ways. You could do fried eggs, you could do hard boiled and add it to the burrito that way. I personally like it scrambled, so I'm gonna do the scrambled way to show you here. Eggs cook up very quickly. And so usually within a minute, 2 minutes at the most, if you're doing more eggs, your eggs are gonna be ready. So I'm gonna just shift it around. You can see as it's cooking pretty quickly. Shift it around, get the less cooked part up. Now, eggs can have some great health benefits because they do have a lot of protein. There also has been some negative information about eggs and health. And so currently what I recommend is thinking about using eggs sometimes, meaning maybe once or twice a week. But I think the jury is out. There's some evidence that shows a lot of health benefits, but others don't. But I think the big thing is everything in moderation, and also what you put with the eggs. So if you're having bacon and eggs and sausage and pancakes all together, it's a little bit different than if you're having eggs in a breakfast burrito that includes some kale and some roasted potatoes. So I think my eggs are just about done. You can see some of them are a little bit still runny, but it's gonna cook up. So I'm gonna turn off my heat because it often will continue to cook. So there we go, we got our scrambled eggs. We're slowly assembling our ingredients for our breakfast burritos. So I will put that there and we will start assembling. Okay, so I'm gonna talk a little bit about tortillas. There's so many options of tortillas when you go to the grocery store today. Although right now there's not a lot of tortilla options because with the coronavirus, a lot of the stores are selling out of products like tortillas and breads. But typically when the stores are fully stocked, there's lots of options. I mean, some stores may even have 100 options of tortillas. So what I tend to look for when I'm buying a tortilla is that it's a whole grain. And that involves reading the label. Okay, so I have a couple different tortillas here. And so what I tend to look for is a whole wheat tortilla. But even with the whole wheat tortillas, they vary a lot. Some are 100% whole wheat and some are just a little bit of whole wheat. So you kind of have to really make sure you're investigating the nutrition label. And so when I'm looking at the nutrition label, what I'm gonna look for is a couple things. I'm gonna look for the calories. I would say that tortillas vary dramatically and they can go from as low as 40 to 50 calories for one tortilla, up to 250 or 300 calories per tortilla. So you really want to be looking, that's a huge range. And so you want to make sure you're looking at one, at the calories. I also like to look at the fiber because that is going to show you, tends to show you how much of a whole grain there is in it. So this one says 3 grams of fiber, 110 calories. And then I also like to go to the ingredients. And when you're looking at ingredients, they always put the ingredient that has the most of it first. And so, for example, this one, the first ingredient is whole wheat flour. So that's gonna be what I have most of in this product. The second ingredient for this is water, then some canola oil, some salt, some baking powder, as well as a few other preservatives. And so those are, I would say this is a pretty clean tortilla. The main ingredient is whole wheat flour, doesn't have a lot of other fillers. So this could be a good option. Another option I like to use for kids, because they often need a little smaller size depending on the age of the kid. But this would be for kind of maybe 9, 10-year-old and younger. It has a little bit smaller, slightly smaller size tortilla. It has 50 calories. It also does have quite a bit of fiber. It has dietary fiber, 8 grams. And then when I'm gonna look at the ingredients, I'm like, ooh, why is it 8 grams? That's a lot more than the other one. And so one of the things I'm gonna look at is what's in it. So it's got water as the first ingredient, which is fine. Oat fiber, also fine. Whole wheat flour, also fine. Soy flour. And then it has some other things that kind of help keep it together. So I'd say this is another great option. But I also think it's really important when you're buying tortillas is that they taste good. And so these are ones I've tried, and my kids do really like these. Here's one other option, another brand. I'm not partial to any specific brand, but again, I'm just looking that it is gonna be a healthier option. You can't always look at what's written on the front because sometimes what's written on the front is a little bit deceiving. So this one says good source of fiber, which may be true, but sometimes isn't. And so what I'm gonna do is again, look at the back. So I'm gonna look at the nutrition label, calories, 110, which is fine, dietary fiber. Now this one is only 1 gram of fiber. So, you know, somehow along the way, some of the fiber is not in there. I'm gonna look at the ingredients. It has whole wheat flour. So tends to be similar to the other one because it does have whole wheat flour as the first ingredient. Second ingredient's water, then some vegetable shortening. So if I was gonna look at those two, I'd probably choose that first one because it has more fiber. And then it also has, instead of vegetable shortening, it has canola oil, which would probably be a little bit healthier oil. So really important to read your labels because if you buy a white tortilla in the store, it can be the same size or sometimes even smaller and have more calories and have no fiber. So the fiber is what's going to be helping you fill up, as well as I tend to really like the taste. But sometimes getting used to the whole wheat flavor, it has a little bit nuttier flavor and it takes some getting used to. So a lot of times I say try out several different brands and see what you like to try to get used to some real tasty flavors. Okay, so that's our tortilla lesson. And so we're gonna take a tortilla. I'm gonna first start with one of the kid-sized tortillas. And I'm going to put some of my ingredients on. One more thing I need to do is to get my cheese. And so cheese, there's lots of different options for cheese. I'm gonna use a Jack cheese. You could also use cheddar cheese. You certainly could use mozzarella. I also like to give options for non-dairy. And I have found this cheese called Chow cheese is a really good option. It's a plant-based cheese. It's based on tofu, as opposed to some of the other alternative cheeses are based on some more processed products. This one is very tasty. And so this can be a good cheese alternative. It does melt really well, which is kind of nice. So if for various reasons you're avoiding dairy, this can be a nice alternative for cheese. For this, I'm actually gonna shred some cheese. So I'm gonna do some Jack cheese. Now for my recipe, I say that it's about 2 ounces for 4 servings. So with kids, we could say, okay, if we're gonna have 1 serving, how many ounces would that be? And cheese is one you really want to keep your eye on because cheese can taste really good. It can add a lot of flavor, but it also does have dairy fat in it, which is saturated fat. And some of it's okay, but it's good not to have too much of it. So it's just one of those ingredients you really want to watch and try to measure and make sure you get used to how much is a serving size. So I'm going to shred it. So kind of, I'm eyeball it. I'm going for 2 ounces because I'm going to make 4 serving sizes. And so I'm going to look at my label and this says this is 6 ounces. So I'm just going to do some math in my head, which means I'm gonna do about 2 ounces, a third of this. I also alternatively could use a kitchen scale like I have here. And this can be good if you're not quite sure how much you have, if you have a half a pack or you're not quite sure how much you have. So I'm gonna weigh it, and actually we're gonna double check that this is indeed 6 ounces. So it's just about 6 ounces there, just slightly over. So I wasn't quite sure how much cheese I had. I could cut off a block and get my 2 ounces. So I'm gonna go ahead and shred that. I'm gonna do, like I said, about a third of this block. I'm gonna shred my cheese. Now I actually am using a goat based cheese, goat milk based cheese. Some of us in our family have some issues with cow milk dairy, so sometimes goat milk can be better for some people, but everybody's a little bit different. So you certainly can use what works best for you. So I did about 2 ounces. You can see I did about a third of my block there. And now I'm ready to assemble. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and assemble the burrito. So I take my smaller tortilla here. I'm gonna divide my eggs into about 4 portions. Now I'm gonna be making 2 of these for kids and 2 for adults, so I may do a tiny bit less egg for the kids and a little bit more for the adults. I'm gonna go ahead and put that egg on. I'm gonna go ahead and put again, portion out my cheese, do my kind of 4 portions so I am not unfair. It's very important with kids that things are fair, so we wanna make sure we're fair here. So I'm gonna go ahead and put my cheese on there. I'm gonna go ahead and put out some of my sweet potato. Go ahead and put that on in. I'm gonna do some of my greens. And if I was gonna freeze this, I would go ahead and just roll it up just like this. And actually, I am gonna freeze some of these. So I'm gonna go ahead and roll this up as if I'm gonna freeze it. And then I'm gonna show you what you could do for freezers. There's lots of different options, but one is just to go ahead and put it into some tin foil. And so it's just ready to go as 1 serving size. So I'm gonna go ahead and get that ready for freezing. So there we go, I can freeze that. Breakfast is ready. I'm gonna pop it out, put it in the oven. I think you'd heat it up, depends on a little bit on your oven, but probably an oven temperature about 350, probably for about 10 to 15 minutes to get that all ready to go. I'm gonna go ahead and make another one here. I'm gonna make an adult sized one so you can kind of see what that looks like. So same thing, I'm gonna put my eggs on, use a slightly larger portion of eggs because it's the adult one. Put my cheese on it. And I'd say I'm actually being pretty generous with cheese. You could probably get by with a little bit less if you're watching your cholesterol. And you could still get good flavor. Put on my greens, put on my sweet potato. And then the last but not least, a very important ingredient, at least for me and my family, is some avocado. So I wouldn't freeze the avocado. I don't think that would freeze well. But if you're gonna have it fresh, I do about 1/4 of avocado. Avocados also vary a lot in size. I'd say this is a small to medium avocado. Avocado is really healthy, has a lot of good healthy fats in it, but does have a fair amount of calories. So again, another thing you kind of want to watch your portion of, depending on your health issues. But I'm gonna go ahead and just slice it up. I like to have a little bit of salt on my avocado, so I'm just gonna add a little sprinkle of salt straight on the avocado. So again, this is my salt that I can control it. So just a little sprinkle of that. And then I'm just gonna put my avocado on my burrito before I roll it up here. There's some nice avocado. Roll it on up here. The cheese is gonna kind of melt, especially if you assemble it when everything's hot. The cheese is gonna kind of melt. So I'm gonna put it on my plate. And this is gonna be a really filling breakfast because it's got the sweet potato, it's got the greens, it's got the whole wheat tortilla. I would kind of serve that probably with a side of fruit just to make a full complete breakfast. Get your fruits and vegetables in the same day. So for example, if you wanted to make this plate look a little prettier, you might add on some berries here on the side. So maybe a couple raspberries. I'm gonna wipe my hands so I get my avocado off my berries. Maybe a few blueberries. And maybe a few blackberries. You certainly could add other fruits that are fresh. You can kind of see you can make your plate look nice. So that's one thing. Okay. One other thing you can see that's kind of interesting to look at is if you look at this huge plate, it almost looks like you don't have that much for breakfast. So I'm going to show you a little trick. If I put this on a smaller plate, the same food on a smaller plate tends to make it look like you have more. So I'm going to go ahead and change that whole thing. If you look at that, it looks a little bit more full. You could also change it up, change the color of the plate, and you could even add some other designs to make it a little bit nicer. Another tip about these burritos is if you want to try to do a vegan option for this is instead of the egg, you could put in some beans, some black beans, some pinto beans, white beans, and instead of the egg, use the bean as a nice filling treat. You also could add some beans to this recipe. It would add a little bit more fiber, a little bit more flavor. And then a lot of people with burritos like some hot sauce. So whether you like kind of a spicy chili sauce or some salsa, those are other great ways you can add to the burrito to give it some more flavor and kind of customize it how you like it. So hopefully you found some ideas for some breakfast burritos to add some kind of good alternatives to your breakfast routines.